The banner went up at 10 in the morning and I was the one holding the ladder. It was a good banner. I'd paid for it. Rosewood Bakery, every loaf a love letter, and under that two names, hers and Daniel's, not mine. Daniel drilled the bracket into the wall I'd repainted the week before. Nora looked down at me from the top step. "Can you hold it steady?" So I held it steady. 3 years, most of my savings, a wall I'd painted twice, and my job at the end of it was to keep the ladder from wobbling while another man's name went up next to hers. I'd like to say I saw it coming. I didn't. I was good at not seeing the things it would cost me to see. I'd been doing it for 3 years. That morning, on the ladder, I finally ran out of ways not to. I want to tell this straight because I spent a long time telling it crooked. In the crooked version, I was patient. I was the bigger man. Love means you don't keep score. I had a folder in a drawer with every receipt in it, so I knew that last part wasn't true. I just never let myself open the drawer. So here's the straight version. I met Nora at a farmer's market, behind a card table with 8 sourdough loaves on it and a hand-lettered sign. She'd sold 6 and was giving the other 2 away because she couldn't stand to carry them home. I bought one I didn't need and ate the whole thing in my truck, and I thought, there's a person who makes a thing and can't help but give it away. I know that person. I am that person. I should have taken it as a warning, and I took it as a love story. She was the best baker I ever met, and she had no head for money, and I have spent my life being useful to people who need the part I'm good at. It felt less like falling for someone and more like clicking into a slot that had been cut for me. At first it was small. I built her a proofing shelf. I fixed the van. When the market stall did well and she started talking about a real place, a storefront, I said I'd help. And I meant help an afternoon with a level and a drill. But help has a way of sliding. An afternoon became every weekend. The drill became my saw, my router, my truck, my tools, my time. Then the first and last on the lease came due, and she was 3,000 short, and I had it. And what was I going to say? I covered it. I told myself it was a loan. I didn't write anything down because writing it down felt like not trusting her, and not trusting her felt like the one thing that would prove I didn't really love her. That's the trick of it if you've never been the person who does this. You don't give because you're a fool. You give because somewhere back there you learned that being needed is the rent you pay to be allowed to stay. I learned it young. The house I grew up in ran smoother when I was useful and quiet, so I got very good at useful and quiet. I brought that whole toolkit to Nora and I laid it at her feet and I called it love, and some of it was. That's the part that took me longest to admit. Some of it really was. Over 3 years I put in more than I want to say out loud. The ovens. The counters I built by hand. The health inspection that failed the first time over a wiring thing. I then fixed myself at 2 in the morning so we wouldn't lose the opening date. The month her numbers didn't work. I quietly stopped paying my own rent to cover her flour supplier. I moved my tools into the shop and slept on a cot in the back. I told her the lease on my apartment had just ended, a sentence I built the same way I build a cabinet carefully to hold a specific weight. I kept every receipt. I want you to understand I wasn't planning anything. I keep receipts the way some people pray. It's a thing you do so that later, if someone ever asks whether you mattered, you'll have proof. I didn't know yet that the person I most needed to ask was me. Daniel showed up about 8 months before the opening, and I'll be fair to him, because being unfair to him would let me off too easy. He was good company. He called himself a brand consultant, and what that meant in practice was that he was very good at sitting in a room and making the thing in the room feel important. He'd hold up one of Nora's loaves like it was a relic and say, "This place has a story, and story is the whole game." He did a mood board. He picked the font on the sign. He was there for every part of it that felt like being a founder and none of the parts that felt like a bill, and Nora lit up around him. I told myself that was just charm. I had an easy file for things like that, and a true file I kept shut because the true one had my whole life in it and I wasn't ready to move anything into it yet. Here's the thing I couldn't see and June could. Everything I gave Nora, I gave in a way that made her smaller. Every gap I closed said, quietly, "You couldn't have done this without me." I never said it. I would have cut my own hand off before I said it. But you don't have to say a thing for it to be in the room. Daniel gave her nothing and made her feel enormous. I gave her everything and made her feel kept. If you'd asked me back then which of us was the better man, I'd have said me. And I'd have been holding a receipt while I said it. And I'd have been wrong in a way that had nothing to do with money. The first time I let myself feel the shape of it was a dinner, about a month before the opening. 8 of us at the long table in the half-finished shop, pizza on the new counters I'd sealed that afternoon. Somebody's cousin asked how the two of them met, meaning Nora and Daniel, because by then that was the story the table told without anybody deciding to tell it. And Nora laughed and put her hand on Daniel's arm and said, "Oh, it came together." Everybody pitched in. Then she looked down the table at me, warm, generous, and she said, "Sam's basically our investor. We'd be nowhere without Sam." Our investor. She meant it kindly. That was the worst part. She meant it as a thank you, and the whole table nodded like, yes, good, the investor. And I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold. The way a house goes quiet right before you realize the furnace has cut out. I laughed. Of course I laughed. I said, "Somebody's got to keep the lights on." And everybody chuckled and the conversation moved. And under the table I pressed my thumb into the seam of the counter I'd built until the edge of it left a line in my skin I could still see the next morning. Investor. I had slept on a cot in the back of that room. I had a folder of receipts 3 years thick. And I sat there and let a woman I loved introduce me as the money. And I said thank you with my face, because saying anything else might have made me a burden. And being a burden was the one thing I'd spent my whole life making sure I'd never be. June was there that night. She'd done the floors, tile and stone, blunt, dry, saw everything. She caught me by the walk-in on the way out and didn't say anything soft. She just said, "You built this whole place." And then after a second, "You know that, right?" And I said, "It came together," using Nora's exact words, and June looked at me like I'd handed her a board with a crack she could see straight through, and she said, "Sure," and let me go. I thought about that "sure" for a week. The turn, when it came, didn't feel like courage. It felt like being too tired to do the thing I always did. 2 weeks before the opening, Nora came to me with the number. The final build-out had run over. The espresso machine she wanted was $4,000 more than the one we'd budgeted, and there was a gap. She didn't ask me directly. She never asked directly. She just brought the number into the room and set it down and let it sit there, the way you'd set down a heavy bag and rub your shoulder, so the other person offers to carry it, and it was never technically your idea. 3 years, every single time, I picked up the bag. It was the most natural motion in my body. I opened my mouth to say I'll cover it, and I want you to know the words were right there, fully formed, warm and ready, and something in me was just done. Not angry. Just done the way your arm is done after you've held a level over your head too long. It comes down whether you decide it or not. I said, "Can I see the books?" She blinked. In 3 years I had never once asked to see the books. I paid into them. I didn't read them. Reading them would have meant I was the kind of man who reads them, and that man doesn't get to stay. "The books," she said. "The books," I said. "The lease, the loan, the accounts. I put a lot into this. I'd like to see where it went, that's all." It was the most ordinary sentence in the world, and I watched it land on her like weather. And here's what told me everything more than any receipt. She didn't say, "Of course, come look." She said, "Why now?" 2 words, "Why now?" As if there were a right time to see your own life and I'd picked the wrong one. I saw the books that night at the kitchen table in the apartment that was hers now, that I'd co-signed and never lived in because I'd been sleeping in the shop. I'm not going to walk you through every line because the numbers aren't the story. I always thought they were, and they never were. But I'll give you the 3 that mattered. The lease was in her name only. I'd handed over the first and last, $3,000, and the lease had my money on it and not my name. When I found the email chain, I saw why. Daniel had told her back at the start that you don't want to muddy the ownership. Investors get paid back. Partners get complicated. I had funded my own erasure and someone had talked her through the paperwork. The loan, the real one, the equipment loan, 40,000 was co-signed. By me. My name was on the debt and off the deed. I was the guy the bank could come to if it all fell down, and I was nowhere on the thing that would stand up if it didn't. And the third one, this is the one that did it. Buried in the build-out costs was a line for brand and creative D. Consulting, $6,000, paid out over the last 8 months. Daniel had been getting paid. Out of the account I kept alive by not paying my own rent. The freeloader had been drawing a salary for holding up loaves and picking a font, and I had been sleeping on a cot 40 feet away, and I had funded his fee to charm my girlfriend out from under me. I sat at that table for a long time, not doing anything, just sitting, until the coffee she'd made me went cold and the light in the window turned the gray that comes right before a house lights its lamps. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I did the thing I was best at one last time. I stayed quiet and useful and did not make trouble, and then, sitting there, I finally opened the drawer in my own head and read the receipts, and every single one of them said the same thing in a different amount. You were the money. You were only ever the money. And you did that to yourself, buddy, one bag at a time. The thing that broke wasn't my heart. My heart had been breaking so slowly for so long I'd stopped feeling it, like a sound you only notice when it stops. What broke was the other thing. The rule I'd carried since I was a kid, that being needed was the rent I paid to be allowed to stay. I sat at that table and I stopped paying it, and I want to tell you it felt like freedom, but I've promised to tell this straight. It felt like the floor going out. Freedom came later, and it came slower, and it came from a completely different direction than I was looking. I didn't blow it up. That's not what this is. I want that on the record, because the version of me from 3 years earlier is somewhere in you maybe, waiting to hear that I finally got loud, and I need him to hear that loud was never the thing that saved me. I went back the next morning. The opening was in 10 days. Everyone was there, Nora, Daniel, the friends, June doing grout in the corner with her back to all of it and one ear on everything, the way she does. I said plainly that I wanted my name off the loan and my 3,000 back on paper as a loan with a date, and my tools were leaving with me that afternoon. I didn't raise my voice. I'd built the whole room. I didn't need to be loud in it. Daniel started first because Daniel always started first. Sam, man, come on. We're all family here. You don't put a price on. And I looked at him and said, you've been drawing 6 grand out of an account I kept alive by sleeping in the back. Don't tell me about price. And for once he didn't have the sentence ready. His whole gift was the sentence being ready, and it wasn't, and the room noticed. Nora didn't manage it this time. There wasn't a room angle left to manage. She looked at me, and for a second her face did the thing it used to do only when no one was watching, the true thing, and she said, quiet, I never asked you to sleep in the back, Sam. I know, I said. That's the whole problem. I'd have done anything if you asked. You didn't have to ask. That's not love, that's just a really convenient man. And then she said the thing. The one I'd built the drawer to keep from ever hearing. She didn't say it cruelly. That's what let it land. She said it like she was finally, tiredly telling the truth, and part of her was relieved too. I never saw you as a partner, she said. You made it possible, I know that. But when I pictured the person standing next to me when it all worked, it was never you. It was somebody who made me feel like I did it. You made me feel like you did. There it was. 3 years, and it fit in 3 sentences. I'd have paid the whole folder again just to not have heard it, and I needed to hear it more than I'd ever needed anything I bought. The friends heard it too. That was the part she couldn't take back. All those people who'd nodded along to our investor. They heard the founder tell the man who built it that he was never going to be allowed to be a person to her, only a resource, and I watched them rearrange her in their heads, one face at a time. Nobody said anything. They didn't have to. She saw it happen the same as I did. For the first time in 3 years, the room read the situation the way it actually was, and there was no receipt I could hold up and no gap I could close to fix what my leaving had just shown them. The opening happened. I didn't go. I heard it went fine. The espresso machine, the cheaper one in the end, worked. People liked the bread because the bread was always good. The bread was the one true thing in the whole enterprise, and it was hers, all hers, and I've never once pretended otherwise. Daniel lasted about a month. It turns out story isn't collateral, and when the account got tight and there was no quiet man in the back closing the gap just sat there open, and Daniel was very good at rooms and very bad at gaps. He drifted off toward the next thing that already worked. Nora called me about 6 weeks after I left. I almost didn't pick up, and then I did because I'm still me. The earned kind of me is still built on the anxious kind. You don't get a new house, you just fix the wiring. She said the machine was making a noise, and I knew the way you know a board is about to crack, exactly what the call was. It wasn't about the machine. She was reaching for the bag again, setting it down in the room between us, rubbing her shoulder. And the old motion in my body wanted to pick it up so badly. I could have told you the part number. I could have been there in 20 minutes. Being needed by her was the closest thing to being loved by her I'd ever gotten, and here it was on offer one more time. I said, "It's the pressure valve. There's a guy named Marcus, does all the cafes on 3rd, he'll have you running by noon." And then I said the hardest sentence I have ever said, harder than any of the ones I'd built to hold weight, because this one I built to let it go. I said, "But it can't be me anymore, Nora. I hope the place does great, I mean that, it just can't be me." There was a long quiet on the line. And then she said, "Okay." Not okay like the fight was over. Okay like she'd finally heard me, maybe for the first time, now that there was nothing left in it for either of us. And we hung up, and I sat with the phone in my hand, and the floor did not go out. That was new. Here's how I know I actually changed, and it's got nothing to do with Nora. About 4 months later, June called me. She'd bought a wrecked little corner unit 2 neighborhoods over and was turning it into a proper tile and stone showroom, doing most of it herself, the way she does everything, and she'd hit a framing problem she didn't want to muscle through wrong. I drove over on a Saturday with my tools. And I want to be honest about the anxious guy still living in me, because he showed up too the second I walked in. Some old part of me started doing the math on how much of this I could take over, how indispensable I could make myself, how I could turn one Saturday into every Saturday and a slot cut just for me. That reflex doesn't die. You just get to see it coming now. I saw it coming. And I fixed the one framing problem she'd called about, the actual one, and then I put my drill down. June looked at the drill on the floor, then at me. She's not a soft person, June. She said, "That's it. You're not going to find 9 more things wrong with my building and rebuild the whole front for free and sleep in the back." "No," I said. "I'm going to fix the thing you asked me to fix, and then I think you're going to buy me lunch, and that's going to be the whole deal." And she laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and she said, "Look at you." And then, a beat later, quieter, "Good. We got the header in before it got dark." At the end she needed the top corner of a shelf bracket held while she drove the anchors, and I went to hold the ladder for her out of pure habit, and she stopped me. She said, "Nope, your turn." And she pointed at the step. So I went up, and she planted a boot on the bottom rung and put both hands on the rails and held it steady, and she said up at me, "You eat today. You didn't, did you?" And I said no, I hadn't, and she said we'd fix that too. And I stood up there on somebody else's ladder, being held steady for once, and I felt the thing I'd been trying to buy for 3 years just arrive, for free, from a direction I wasn't even looking. I'd spent my whole life believing I had to earn my place by closing everyone's gaps. And it turned out the people worth staying for were the ones who'd hold the ladder while you fixed your own. Nora never once held the ladder. She just always had a heavier bag ready. It took me 3 years, most of my savings, and a sign with the wrong name on it to learn the difference. I'd have learned it cheaper if I could, but I don't think I'd have learned it any other way. I still keep receipts, old habit, but I don't read them like prayers anymore. I read them like what they are, a record of a man who used to think love was a thing you paid for, kept by a man who finally found out it isn't. The bracket went in straight. June bought me lunch. It was, all things considered, the best deal I ever made.